without further ado, it's Wellness Wednesday. Let me just spotlight myself so you can see me. Hello, you know who I am. We have a nice group on today, and it's Wellness Wednesday, so that means that every Wednesday when we're in between meal sessions, we like to talk about health and wellness topics. And it's just Wednesday because, you know, we don't go to matinees anymore on Wednesday, because that used to be our matinee day. But it's just Wellness and Wednesdays. It's the alliteration thing. So today we have Sarah Otazo, who's a certified functional nutritional therapist, and I want to talk a little bit about what that means. She's here today to talk about pandemic nutrition, supporting ourselves and particularly our immune systems, because our immune systems, I think, are working overtime, whether it's with in tandem with the vaccine or with fighting off, you know, the bad guys, the viruses out there. So we really want to talk about how and how we're eating. We talked about this last week with the how we're drinking, and actually with Cope Center did a program last week about drinking during a pandemic and how we're drinking. I'm not talking about drinking water. I'm talking about drinking alcohol, and also consuming sort of in a way that's not healthy. And that sugar, you could just, she said you can substitute out alcohol for sugar or carbs. So we're going to talk today about how our eating has really been affected this past year and how what we can do to change it. And I also want to mention a little plug for Sarah that there is going to be Sarah's going to be teaching a meal class, a wellness. We've never done this as far as I know, but a health and wellness a 6-week, it's called Restart, and Sarah might talk a little bit about that at the end. It's a very limited class, so we want to, you know, we just want to say that up front. We can, you know, really Sarah can only work with, I think we have a limit of 10 participants on that.
Yes.
So that will be coming up, but it's a real commitment to all six weeks. But today we're going to talk about pandemic nutrition, and today our guest speaker is Sarah Otazo. Welcome, Sarah. Let me just
thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really, really pleased to be joining you today. And I want to jump right in and, there we go. I want to jump right in and talk about one of the other topics I'm going to add in today is our mental health, because, oh my goodness, what has happened to the collective mental health of this planet during the last year is pretty dramatic. And food is one of the things we can control that contributes to that. So I'm adding that in. So I titled this Supporting Ourselves to Thrive in Challenging Times. A lot of people come to me and they're just barely surviving. And again, food is such a primary thing that we can control. And one of the only things we can control, along with movement, sleep, and the effect can be so profound. So let's just jump right in and talk about what is nutritional therapy and how does it differ from, as you mentioned, the registered dietitian who came recently. So a registered dietitian goes through training that may allow them to work more in an institutional setting. So they're in a hospital deciding what goes into somebody's feeding tube. They're in the hospital making sure people get the appropriate foods related to prescribed diets by their physicians. They tend to work more, again, in an institutional setting. Not that none of them have private practices, but generally they tend to be hired by somebody else. The nutritional therapy approach is more of a holistic approach. And we talk about identifying and removing the dietary stressors. Well, what does that mean? We all have some dietary stressors. The common ones are sugar, processed carbohydrates, processed foods, but our bodies have been under so much pressure. Our immune system is asked to make so many decisions during the day because we're exposed to so much more than cavewoman Sarah was, that it sometimes misfires and it says, oh, this nutritious food, it's an enemy. Uh-oh. And it starts to mount a response. could be onions, peaches, chicken, could be any food on the planet. But when our body experiences a food as a stressor and it mounts that response, that can be really depleting over time. The second half of, before I jump in further, I want to say some people would say, some practitioners would say, let's identify the foods to which you're sensitive, remove them, and then you'll feel better. Nutritional therapy takes it another step and says, well, let's also use that time when we've eliminated these stressors to identify and address any nutritional deficiencies. We're sort of under the triple whammy where it takes more effort to digest the foods that are processed and nutrient void. And the fact that they are nutrient void means we're not getting the nutrients we need. And so we're really struggling. And the third thing is, even if we're eating the most pristine diet imaginable, the nutrients in the tomato I can eat today are so much more depleted or smaller in quantity, less prevalent than the tomato our grandmothers were able to eat. We might have to eat 6 or 7 tomatoes to get the nutrition that they got out of one. So we're kind of up against it in a way. And taking a mindful approach of really looking at what's stressing me out, what are my deficiencies, can really go a long way in benefiting us and benefiting how we feel. The last piece is detoxification. And some practitioners might say, well, that's silly, and the body is perfectly equipped to perform its function of detox through the kidneys, through the liver. But that may have been true again for cave woman Sarah. But the onslaught of stressors, not just dietary, but all kinds of environmental stressors that we're facing today, it's almost like that video, that episode of I Love Lucy, where Lucy and Ethel are working the conveyor belt of the candy. And at first, right, they're managing it. It's at a pace that they can handle. But think of Lucy and Ethel as liver and kidney. And suddenly it speeds up and they're just overwhelmed. They don't know where to put it, right? Literally, they don't know where to put it. And it's kind of the equivalent of what's going on inside our bodies. Just the onslaught of assault against our immune system, where the immune system's being asked, make a decision, is this okay or not? Make another, make another, make another. It's too much, and so it misfires. So supporting detoxification is also a third prong and can go a long way to improving our health. So I want to introduce a concept called the Beaker of Stress. And I apologize, I'm realizing this, some of this doesn't have great clarity. It's a little fuzzy on the left, but you'll get the picture. So on the right, we talk about how underneath that picture of a beaker, we talk about how 30% of our beaker fills up just from the process of running the body, right? There's metabolic waste that is produced from the fact that we breathe, we eat, we digest, we move. But look at all these issues. We're all born with a beaker, and it starts filling up while we're still in the womb. What if we were born during wartime? What if we were born into housing insecurity, food insecurity? What if mom was on crack when she was pregnant? Maybe she took something like thalidomide, or a drug that we know now is extremely dangerous to a fetus, but we just didn't know that then. What if there was a domestic violence situation? So our beaker is filling up while we're in the womb, and then we're born and we're exposed to all of these things. And there comes a point where our personal beaker that has its own crazy mix, or its own brew of all of these factors, starts to spill over. And for one person, it might spill over in the form of cardiovascular issues. For another person, it might be tumors. For another person, it might be an autoimmune issue. For another person, it could be mental health. So it seems like such a simplified concept, but it feels very real to me that everyone's beaker contains that unique mix. And so the way that the problem gets expressed when it finally reaches its tipping point, where we're not emptying it as fast as we're filling it up, is also individual. So I want to talk for a minute about me and how nutritional therapy really gave me my life back. I was a Wall Streeter, married to a very gifted musician who was the editor-in-chief of a music magazine, and we were going about our charmed life. And we were both diagnosed with cancer within 4 months of each other in our late 30s. And we went through chemotherapy together. We were able to have our son after that, and he was the miracle of all miracles. When he was 3.5, my husband had a recurrence and passed away. And 6 months after the funeral, that child was diagnosed with autism. So suddenly I was on this treadmill of grief, and now I'm a single mom. And not only am I a single mom, but how do I support this human who has this pretty dramatic challenge? So it was no surprise that within a few years, I was diagnosed with a couple of autoimmune diseases of my thyroid and my joints. I drove home from that diagnosis appointment and heard on the news that Glenn Frey from the band The Eagles had just passed away, not from rheumatoid arthritis, but from all the complications that evolved from that illness and subsequent medications he was on. And I was terrified. I need to be around for this child. How do I take care of myself? What's the right path? And I am not saying there's not a place for medication. I'm not slamming the medical community at all. My dad was an ophthalmologist who helped many people in his lifetime. But I think when it comes to chronic disease, there's some challenge in the medical community. It's a little bit of a black hole, I would say. So I found out from an integrative medical doctor who said, I will take you as far as we can go with nutrition and supplementation if you want to experiment with that. And let's see where it takes you. And I was on board, and I immediately signed up to go to school and take a deep dive into nutrition and nutritional therapy and what was possible. And I'm happy to report today that my son is a freshman in high school. He's fully mainstreamed. He is a straight A student. He's got his purple belt in karate. He's texting with a girl that he likes. He's keeping in touch with friends. My 2 autoimmune diseases are completely in remission. No blood markers. I feel good. And I'm getting married next month on Zoom to an amazing man who adopted my son. So thank God for nutritional therapy. There's so much that's possible. So what is nutritional therapy? I want to talk a little bit about the early nutrition pioneers. So the first nutritionists were dentists. They saw what was going on in the mouth, and that was the first place to have an easy look inside the body, right? So when you think about indigenous populations, a picture of someone who's a Mayan, an Aztec, an Aborigine, someone from the Northern Hebrides off of Scotland, their jaws and their skulls are so beautifully formed with broad jaws for chewing. They don't need braces. They don't have crowding. They don't have collapsing, shrinking jaws and palates. Nobody needed a palate widener. So there was a dentist in the 30s who noticed within 1 generation, his patients changed so much from not really having too many dental issues unless they were in an injury and actually broke a tooth or knocked some teeth out, to dramatic incidents of dental decay, really serious eating away of the teeth. And he was so confounded by it, he actually closed his practice and traveled the world with his wife by boat in the 30s to visit these indigenous populations and study what was going on. And he saw that, again, they had beautifully formed mouths and jaws and skulls and palates. But when their children, when the generation that went to the big city and had exposure to what he called the foods of commerce, refined sugar, refined flour. That's when the trouble started. He even saw it in some families. If they had enough children over the course of a decade or more, he saw the difference in the older kids versus the younger kids. So his research was quite profound in terms of realizing, oh, the industrial revolution has had some negative side effects on human development. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about a story about cats. There was a physician named Francis Pottinger, also around that time in the 30s and 40s. His father was also a physician and had a tubercular, what they called back then an asylum. Let's call it an institution or a hospital. So his father had a hospital for tuberculosis patients, and the younger Dr. Pottinger was doing experiments to figure out what the heck can we do to help people with this terrible disease. He started doing some experiments with cats, and when the neighborhood community heard that he was doing those experiments, suddenly he was arriving at work every day and there'd be 50 abandoned cats on the doorstep of the hospital. So suddenly he had to feed all these cats. So there weren't enough leftovers from the cafeteria. So he called the butcher down the street and said, just send me some meat. And he was feeding it to them raw because cats. So he was going along with some of his experimentation, and he realized after a while that the cats who were getting the raw meat diet were really more robust and healthy compared to the cats who were getting the cooked food diet from the cafeteria. So he scrapped his work in helping tuberculosis patients and dedicated the rest of his life to studying dietary changes in cats. He broke the cats into 4 groups. Every single cat got a baseline healthy diet for a cat. So they were getting cod liver oil, maybe a little bit of vegetable, raw meat, raw milk. And the first group, he just gave them those foods. The second group, he gave them those foods plus skim milk. The next group, he gave them the base foods plus evaporated milk. And the fourth group, he gave them the baseline good diet plus condensed milk, which is milk and tons of sugar. He watched what happened. He certainly saw changes and deterioration in the cats by degree between groups 1 to 4. He bred them within their groups. So healthy diet cats were mated with healthy diet cats and produced healthy offspring. By the second generation, the cats on the evaporated milk and especially the condensed milk diet were really showing signs of mental health disorders. Fights were breaking out. They had to be separated, anger, constantly being at each other. The other cats were just peaceful and basking in the sun. By the third generation, the cats who were getting the skim to a small extent, the condensed milk by a dramatic extent, and the evaporated milk, were having their spines break. And that third generation was unable, with the condensed milk, the sugary milk, became unable to reproduce. 3 generations. He rehabilitated those same cats within their lifetime and was able to get them to reproduce. And it took until the 4th generation for them to regain the shape of their skull, the size of the wideness of their palate, their mental health, and their physical health. So 3 generations to get to the point of not being able to reproduce, 4 generations to recover. We are now in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th generation of exposure to heavy, heavy sugars and processed carbohydrates. If you had to make your own Twizzler or make your own Twinkie, you wouldn't eat very many of them in your lifetime, but they are just so readily available. And I think that story is just so profound when we think about continuing the continuance of human evolution. We're already at the point where 30% of couples need intervention to reproduce. Where are we going to be in 50 years? I mean, it's rather dramatic when you think about it that way. So let's talk for a minute about genetics. Without question, our genes can tell us if there's a bit of a greater propensity for a particular health event to occur. But supporting epigenetic expression, which means how does the environment affect expression or suppression of genes? How does that benefit me? And I love this quote from holistic practitioner Chris Kresser: genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. I mean, that just kind of encapsulates all of it. We have so much control over what's going to happen. And again, does that mean we can 100% control the outcome? No, we're human. But we can certainly take the reins and not just say, well, heart disease runs in my family, everyone gets it, me too. Maybe there's something we can do to make a change there. So the nutritional therapy approach looks at a nutrient-dense whole food diet as the foundation where we start. And then we look at these 5 pillars of health, starting from the left: digestion. We are not what we eat. We are what we absorb, assimilate, utilize, and that only happens if digestion is functioning properly. We could be eating, again, the most pristine diet, really, really trying to get those nutrients out of the diet, and still have a rough time of it if digestion is not working optimally. Digestion starts in the brain when we start thinking about food. If I asked you to think of a lemon, you could salivate, right? So digestion really starts in the brain and continues down one long tube until the waste exits the body through the anus. So there's so many points along that path where things can get a little wonky. So we always work to make sure digestion is optimal. Blood sugar regulation. Long before a diagnosis where somebody says, oh, we should put you on insulin, there's a broad spectrum of blood sugar regulation dysfunction. So reining that in and bringing it away from the brink can do wonders for our function. Fatty acids, we certainly eat fats, but with the advent of vegetable oils, really in the last 100 years, restaurants use so much vegetable oil, processed foods. If you walked into a 7-Eleven, my gosh, maybe they sell an apple or a pear or a banana, but everything else is a packaged food that probably has some hydrogenated oils in it. So we look at what are the healthiest fats that we can obtain to support our fatty acid balance. Every cell of our body has a membrane that's made up of fats and cholesterol. So it's crucial. The next one is minerals. Minerals are like the spark plugs of the human body. So they kick off different processes, and if they're depleted or if they're out of balance, those processes don't happen properly. And then the last one, which is so profound and such an easy one to change, is hydration. When we're dehydrated, we don't transport nutrients well through the body. No kidding, water actually provides some cushioning, right? So if you were incredibly dehydrated and brittle and took a fall, you might have a worse outcome than if you were fully hydrated and, I'll use the word, bouncy or fluffy, right? Like it helps protect you. So let's talk about what a healthy diet is by doing a little quiz. So I don't know if you have a pen and pencil handy, but I'm going to post this quiz and ask you to just, to yourself or on a little piece of paper, answer these 13 questions by rating each question from 0, where this symptom doesn't happen to me, to a 3, which means this symptom happens frequently for me. So I'll give you a couple minutes and I'll sip my beverage and we'll. Okay. You can raise a physical or virtual hand if you need another minute or two. But if you're good and you've tallied up your score, so you could have a score anywhere from 0 to 39, right? If you had a 3 for every single one. Okay, are we ready for results?
Yep.
Let's do it. Dun, da, da, da. Okay. So if you scored a 0 to 5, then all these questions were related to blood sugar handling. 0 to 5 means you're doing pretty well. 6 to 9 means maybe there's some things you could work on to kind of bring yourself back into balance. And a 10 or higher means things could be headed in a bad direction. Nobody can predict, but there are absolutely some things that could benefit and help walk you back from there. A little later in the presentation, I'm going to talk about a basic plan that can help everybody. And then from there, it gets pretty bio-individual, but there's certain changes that really can benefit everyone. So moving on, let's talk for a minute about human health and blood sugar. So we have never before in the history of mankind been in a position where we had an emergency need to lower our blood sugar. So think about it. We were designed to thrive in the face of scarcity. Cave woman Sarah may have woken up and looked outside and said, I need something to eat. And then scratched her head and just said, oh my gosh, that's so much work. I'm going to nap. Right? But here we just walk to our pantry and have a something. And then we walk to our pantry and have another little something. And so we've changed from having dessert on occasion to having dessert after lunch and dinner. We think that our kids and our grandkids can't make it through a soccer practice without somebody bringing the snacks. I have a friend from Italy who said when she moved here, she was so confounded by the concession stand at the movie theater because food is not a passive activity for them. She couldn't understand, like, what do you mean you eat while you're engaged in some other activity? And there's so many cultures that really honor the idea of eating, but we have turned passive pastimes into food eating events. Oh my gosh, how much food are we going to put out for the Super Bowl? We're all going to watch TV together. Make sure you make the popcorn or the cookies because it's movie night. So the idea that we've conjoined these two things is something that we just decided to do. It doesn't have to be like that. So these days we're generally eating too frequently, a bit too much, too many carbs as compared to proteins and fats, right? So there are 3 macronutrients. Foods fall into some combination of fat, protein, carbs. It's not that carbs are the devil, it's that we are allowing them to take up so much space in the diet, it's crowding out the other things. And we're generally eating too many low or no nutrient processed foods. And that includes bread, even if it's whole wheat, bagels, pasta, even if it's whole wheat, muffins, pancakes, pretzels, crackers, chips. And that's before we talk about having a dessert or some candy. So if you think about how do we eat? We eat each meal and each snack in isolation. So we're having French toast in the morning with some syrup, and then we're not thinking that, oh, that was pretty nutrient void. Maybe I should have a nutritious thing at lunch. No, maybe we're having a sandwich at lunch with more white bread. And then we're hungry, so we have a little tea and a couple of cookies or a handful of potato chips. And then at dinner, maybe we're ordering pizza. So we're never getting out of that mode of white flour, processed cheese. It's a constant. And this causes these sugar highs and crashes that really affect our energy levels, really affect our mood. And it's not even about performing, it's about coping and, how are we getting through our day? I want to focus a little bit more on mental health. So here are all the factors that affect our mental health. When I start in the upper left corner, we just talked about blood sugar and how blood sugar stability is crucial for all aspects of health, including mental health. Having neurotransmitters available, so we have to be able to process them. We need a balance of inflammatory processes. So we're very good at inflammation. We're not so good at de-inflaming. We have to look at trauma history. We have to look at microbial balance. So we talk about the bacteria in our gut. Do we only need good bacteria? Quote, good? No, we need a balance. The things we say are bad aren't necessarily bad. It's that they're taking up too much space. They're out of balance. So we need a good balance of bacteria in our gut. And again, those sugars that we're eating and the carbohydrates we're eating are feeding the less beneficial bacteria. They're starting to take over. We need nutrient sufficiency in general. We need support in terms of our social community. Our economic situation makes a difference. Access to nature. Oh my gosh, in this pandemic, how huge has that been? And then I would throw, of course, movement on this list, whether it's full-on exercise or just moving. You know, exercise, when you think about it, exercise is like a construct that was generated to help ourselves in the face of technology. If we had to if we were out in the field doing our best little house on the prairie and doing all the work that they had to do in a day to survive, we wouldn't be thinking, oh, I didn't get my exercise in, right? Exercise is, okay, these days we have dishwashing is automatic, clothes washing is automatic, cars get us everywhere we need. It's easy to get takeout. It's easy to get at least partially prepared foods. We're so sedentary. We sit in front of computers all day for a job instead of working in a factory, being on our feet all day. And it's really taking its toll. So all these factors are part of our mental health. I'm going to focus on the top one for just a second, the neurotransmitters. So that's like the messaging system to move information that's sometimes compromised when we have mental health issues. So the way the neurotransmitters get formed, the precursors, are amino acids. And you may be familiar with some of these: serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine. We don't have to go into these in detail, but I'd love for you to walk away with the idea that neurotransmitters are crucial. They're formed from amino acids. The second bullet talks about how each neurotransmitter has a different set of nutrients that need to be present in order for the whole process of neurotransmission to happen. And where do amino acids come from? Protein. We're really lacking protein, especially women, especially older women. So important for us. We also need to feed those microbes, feed those guys in our gut that influence the brain. And again, what happens in our microbiome has a massive effect on our mental and physical health. The gut, maybe you've heard this, is like the second brain. Look at that second bullet. Highly processed foods can lead to a 50 to 100% increase in risk for clinical depression. And there's a study I cited there, but it's profound. It really is. I'm just going to give you one example of neurotransmitters. So in order to produce serotonin, we get tryptophan, which comes from our food, converted to 5-HTP, and then that gets converted into serotonin. And there are all these cofactors, all these other things that need to be present for that process to happen properly. Look at the third bullet. 80% of serotonin is produced in our gut. So we really need to be focused on how our digestion is functioning, how our blood sugar is managed. So where can we get some of these? Where can we source some of these nutrients? They're abundant in salmon, grass-fed beef and lamb, figs, bananas, root vegetables, and rice. So again, it's not that carbohydrates are the devil, they're just taking up a lot of space. So what should a healthy diet include? I look at, to the extent that we can, if we can pay for organic, that's awesome for our fruits and vegetables. If you're watching your budget, I would say put your efforts towards getting cleaner meats. Getting the clean meats is perhaps less, is more helpful than the clean veg. High quality dairy, fresh organic eggs if we can. Unprocessed grains like oats that you soak overnight, homemade sourdough, raw nuts, dried beans, not canned, and good quality oils like coconut oil or olive oil. So what's not on this list? Breads, cakes, cookies, all those things, right? There are essential fatty acids. We can't produce them in the body. So there are essential fats, there are essential amino acids, proteins that we can't produce. There are no essential carbohydrates. So here's my suggestion to take 1 month to make some improvements. Start with hydration. Take your body weight in pounds, cut it in half. So 150-pound person, 75 ounces of water each day. So 2 quarts of water is 64 ounces. So a little more than 2 quarts of water per day. The easiest way to make sure you get it is measure the entire amount into a pitcher and leave it out on the counter so that you know I have to empty that thing before I go to bed. And obviously, if you want to have a better night's sleep, doing it earlier in the day is a little better than later in the day. Next, so get that going for a week and dial that in. Next, look at 1 serving of a processed carbohydrate. Replace it with a fresh fruit. So if you're used to having some chips in the afternoon, make that a fresh fruit. So now you've made 2 changes. Now take another processed carbohydrate and replace that with a healthy fat, maybe a serving of avocado. And then lastly, replace 1 more of those processed carbohydrates with a healthy protein and fat combination like eggs or a good quality yogurt. And in 1 month, you will have made a serious dent, right? And now you've replaced a lot of your processed foods. Really, really can make you feel dramatically better. I'm going to leave you with the thought that it's not really just about the food. There are lifestyle issues. We've got to be doing things that manage our stress. So again, the most pristine diet eaten when we're so tensed up and rattled isn't going to do it. Focusing on stress management, movement, our sleep, focusing on supplementation to address those deficiencies that, we'd love to get them all from food, but it's tough to do. So sometimes a therapeutic dose of certain nutrients can really help us move forward in a big way. And then looking at our toxic burden. What do we put on our skin? I saw a statistic that said, on average, teenage girls put 14 to 16 products on their skin every day. And they're not buying the most clean products, they're buying the cheapest ones. That stuff just wasn't available 100 years ago. Do we know that humans can take that burden? No. What do we use to clean our homes? What do we use to clean our clothing? And how much exposure do we have to our handy dandy little magic box that we're so connected to? So all of those things make up, are really make or break, right? And taking care of these things, when we talk about the toxic burden, we're helping with our detoxification function. As we remove stressors, we slow down the amount of stuff that's going into the beaker. We slow down the Lucy and Ethel conveyor belt so that our body can do its thing in a much more effective way. And above all, oh my gosh, I try and remember to be extraordinarily kind. I just love that phrase, extraordinarily kind and generous with ourselves. And acknowledge the achievements. If you do a week of getting all the water into your body that we talked about, give yourself a pat on the back. That's pretty awesome. So that's my news for today. I wanted to leave a little time for Q&A. I will tell you, as Michelle had mentioned, I'll be doing a class starting, I believe it's April 22nd. I believe it's a Thursday. It'll show up on the schedule. And it's a 6-week commitment to getting the sugar out. We are going to go through a detoxification. There will be in between contacts with email. You'll get a handout each week. And we're going to commit to cleaning out our pantries and getting rid of the things that aren't serving us. We're going to serve ourselves the things that do serve us. So that'll be available again Thursday. And what was I just going to say about that? Oh, and there will be some paperwork. I'd prefer that people check with their doctor. It's a universal cleaning out that is good for everyone, but you still check with your doctor and let them know that you're making that kind of a change. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There's so much that we can talk about. If I have some questions already in the chat, and sure. I have my own, but the first one that came in, and then just put your questions in the chat, or if you'd rather, just raise your hand and I will call on you to speak. But there was one question: are plant-based substitutes healthy, and are they considered highly processed foods? Great question, Joya.
Yeah. So they absolutely are highly processed. When we're trying to create a burger by, Beyond Burger, for instance, they're taking a bunch of random ingredients to try and mimic the effect of a burger. So in that case, I would say that's extremely highly processed and nutrient void. They're using maybe some coconut oil, that would be beneficial, but they're using some starches, and it's just sort of like, what can we throw at this to put it together? So it's maybe the very occasional treat if you feel that would be a treat, but I would say either avoid the substitutes and don't try and go for that, or eat the real thing.
Interesting. Okay, so I'll just give you, Joya, because you were I think you were at last week's program. So last week we made it really could have been, if I had more, I ate it. You all watched me eat it. The Japanese sweet potato if you were to go to Edgemont and order sesame chicken, it didn't taste like chicken. It didn't have the texture of chicken, but it did have that feel of, wow, this is delicious and it's filling. And if I had maybe some brown rice with it, it would have been really that complete meal, rather than just sort of, I ate it for my lunch and it was really great. But that's the kind of thing, I didn't try to make it seem like chicken. And so all of the machinations you go through to make it have the mouthfeel of chicken or a burger, I just went for it. So it's like the same thing as if you were to, I have to say the veggie burgers at Stuffed Burgers, I used to like them. I don't know if they're the same because they look like they changed the recipe, but that you could taste, like there was like, I was eating a beet, it was like a beet burger, and I could actually parse out the different components. It wasn't trying to be a hamburger like Beyond Burger. If you use a portobello mushroom, it is what it is. You're not manipulating it into some textural thing. If you want meat sauce, by all means, chop up your mushrooms, saute them with onions, and you have a meaty umami kind of meaty flavor in your meat sauce, in your mushroom sauce. Let's call it what it is. It is what it is. But if it makes you feel better, hey, go for it, right?
Right. And I think that's a great distinction to make, is that there are highly processed plant-based foods, and then there is just, I'm going to saute a vegetable and create thickness from pureed vegetables to add to a sauce. Awesome. That's using the whole food and not processing it very much at all. So fabulous.
Right. It's processing in like manipulating what it is. And then it's, I don't know, using things that aren't in nature. I guess that's the way to put it. Like the Dr. Prager has a veggie burger that is what it is. I could pick out the peas in it, and I could pick out the carrots in it. And if I had to deconstruct it, I know of everything that's in there. When I look at the ingredients, that's a good way, Sarah, right? To look at the ingredients.
Absolutely.
If you don't understand what it is, and probably it's some process thing, right? I mean,
Yeah, there's a great author, Michael Pollan,
yep.
who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food. But one of his books, he starts out with by saying, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And he goes on to say, I hate to give away the entire book in 7 words, but that's kind of it. If your grandmother walked down the aisle in the dairy aisle and you showed her the Stringles, she might say, I don't know, that's not food. Okay, put it down. Like, use the grandmother test. Would your grandmother know what it is? Does it have fewer than 4 or 5 ingredients? Those are great criteria.
Yeah. A question from Jennifer is, yogurt Greek or regular? Why is Greek so thick? Greek so thick. It's a mouthful.
Greek so thick. So you can make thicker yogurt. You can actually make sour cream, right? By letting it ferment a little longer and by draining it or straining it. So straining longer creates a thicker product. The bigger issue to me with yogurt is it whole? Our ancestors didn't say, oh, this has too much fat, I should get the skim version. They didn't peel the skin off the chicken and say, oh, that's too much fat for me. The fat is what we need. So full fat, first of all, and ideally grass-fed, right? So animals that were fed grass produce nutrients because they're given the nutrients that they need. They were not meant to eat grains, and we pour grains down their throats because it's efficient and it's cheap. So the product they produce is causes them health issues, and it produces less value for us. So grass-fed, organic, full fat.
Okay. And another question, can you speak to eating for immune health?
Oh, everything we talked about would be eating for immune health. I didn't really specify, like, let's focus on our immune systems, but thank you so much for saying that. Okay, so when I have a client come to me, they may come in with allergies. They may come in with immune compromise. They may come in with other things, cardiovascular issues, thyroid issues, but I'll rarely go right to helping them with that. Mm-hmm. When I work on those foundations of health that we talked about those 5 pillars, the blood sugar regulation, digestion, mineral balance, fatty acids, and hydration. If we had all of those in balance, we could create a near superhuman for whom disease states would have a tough time grabbing hold. There's some imbalance going on that's the backdrop for nearly every symptom and problem that we're having. There is a nutritional component to almost everything we do. So I would say focusing on that list of foods that we talked about, make sure you're getting your protein. We talked about how many ounces of water to drink. Let's talk about how many grams of protein to eat, because your immune system it's one of the building blocks. Protein and fats are the building blocks of our immune system. So for them, it varies for sure, but I like to say at a minimum, 2/3 of your weight. So again, that 120 pound person, let's say 160 pound person, 3/4 of that is 120 grams of protein per day. Now, some of you may say, oh, that's crazy high. How could I possibly get that? But when you bring some mindfulness to it and just start focusing on getting to that target, it can make a huge difference. We go for meal after meal without focusing on protein and fat, and suddenly we're at the end of our day and we're like, oh, I didn't get much at all. So when we bring it into the forefront, starting with breakfast, you can change the way your day goes and really support immune health.
Okay. From Vanjie, what is EMF exposure?
Oh, electromagnetic fields. So before the age of Edison, before the 1880s, we didn't even have electricity. This is before I'm talking about cell phones. We didn't even have electricity in our homes, right? For all of human history up until the late 1800s. Once we installed electricity into our homes, human beings respond to that. And the way we respond is we can, some of us, if we're sensitive, just create little blips of cortisol all day. So our body is now sensing a stressor and reacting by producing a hormone. It's tiring and depleting to create that response all day. Now add in how far we've gone. Maybe we live near a cell tower, right? Maybe we live near one of the big electric towers. So human beings we are bioelectric beings. And so we are in reaction to our environment. I actually have a little protective case. And again, a lot of people outside of the holistic community would say, that's ridiculous, right? But when you look at the studies and you read not one study, but 50 studies, 60 studies, it's real. There was a company in Austria who had incredible success. They were a spa and they had incredible success with patients with different types of chronic illness that were just totally debilitating, even terminal illness. And they had this incredible success rate of restoring people's health. And suddenly their protocols that had worked for decades just kind of started falling apart and people weren't getting better. And it turned out that a cell tower had been built a quarter of a mile away from their building. And so the effect that they wanted to create wasn't there anymore. So they closed up shop and started a company to shield environments from electromagnetic field exposure.
Wow, interesting. Another question, do you have any guidance on eating to regulate acid reflux?
Yes. So my interpretation of what acid reflux is this. When we eat a food and we chew it properly, we chew it really well, we swallow it, it hits the stomach. The stomach is intended to be an incredibly acidic environment. If you took a tablespoon of stomach acid, of HCl, hydrochloric acid, it could burn through the metal on the car. It's intended to be that way. And that's the single place in the body where we're supposed to have that intensely acidic environment. It breaks down proteins. Think about our ancestors who were walking along, picking up stuff off the ground and putting it in their mouths. So they were getting pathogens. They were getting proteins that were undesirable, right? Maybe parasites. But if their stomach acid was strong enough, they were dying in that puddle of acid. So stomach acid is actually a form of one of our immune system defenses. After age 25, our ability to produce stomach acid depletes, and also we just hammer away at our ability by not honoring the idea of rest and digest. We eat when we're standing, we eat when we're talking on the phone, we eat driving, we eat watching a screen or multitasking. So digestion kind of shuts off and thinks, oh, we're in GOAT mode. I'm not supposed to be digesting. So stomach acid production reduces. It also reduces in the face of, again, here's those culprits: sugar, flour, white or whole wheat. And so when the stomach acid is depleted, the environment isn't acidic enough for that pyloric sphincter, the sphincter that's going to let the food move out of the stomach and continue on its journey into the small intestine. The body in its wisdom is saying, no, this isn't acidic enough. We need to get that acid up. So it kind of sits there and festers and it bubbles up. And now we have acid reflux because we're burning into our esophagus. I've had clients who stopped their reflux in a day or two by reducing grains, reducing flour, reducing sugar. Could be dairy sometimes, but mostly it's the others.
Wow, interesting.
Also, don't eat right before you lie down. You know, leaving a couple hours before bed really helps too. Let the food move on its merry way.
Another question about dry beans versus low sodium canned.
Okay, so it's really about the processing. So first of all, in a perfect world, we'd be able to get no sodium beans right? So the fact that we've added in this preservative is perhaps beneficial if we did it ourselves. Probably has some citric acid in it, may have some other preservatives. So really the issue is more about how far down the path of processing did this go, which is why dried beans have only been dried, and canned food tends to lose a lot of its nutrients and be a little more processed than dried.
Okay, great. Sharon, go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Mine is about hydration. Now, a friend of mine, she drinks her water right out of the tap, and I just can't do it. So I have one of those, I have a zero water pitcher, the huge one, which I absolutely love. But then they said some filters take all the minerals and stuff out, which you might need. But the other ones maybe leave some in, but I love the zero water pitcher because it tastes absolutely delicious. The water is so clear. So what's your take on that? What do you, should we drink water out of the faucet? I just don't like that taste.
So I agree with you. Once you've gotten used to filtered water, you realize how much taste there is in town water. All municipalities have some acceptable level of irritants and toxins in the water, right? Oh, it's only X parts per million, which is wonderful from a public safety standpoint, right? We are protecting the population without question. However, why not go further than that? So I love the idea of using a filter. I have a Berkey, which is a big old pot that sits on my counter and has a dispenser in it. And it allows me to just always have it available in large quantity. And their filtering is quite good. What you're talking about with the minerals is there is a process called reverse osmosis, where all the mineral value is taken out. And then the osmosis process that happens in our body is depleting. So if you took what, so our body has minerals in it, right? Some level of minerals. Hopefully it's not too depleted, but most of us are walking around with some deficiencies. If you have water that's completely empty of minerals, the process of osmosis is going to have us leach and donate our minerals to that completely mineral-free water. So over time, it's depleting. There are reverse osmosis systems where the last step is that they add back in some mineral. So they take away all the bad stuff and then add that back in.
Well, that's what I was worried about. Like, I did have my minerals and stuff checked, and I was really good. I was surprised because all I drink is this zero water. And I do take vitamins that contain minerals. So I guess maybe that's keeping me balanced.
That can help. I will say there's some minerals for whom it's difficult to draw a conclusion from the blood. So for instance, 98% of the phosphorus in our body is stored in the tissue. If you take a blood sample to see how concentrated our phosphorus levels are, you're not really getting the picture at all, right? So sometimes it's hair tissue for minerals. Hair is a phenomenal indicator of our mineral balance. But no one's going to recommend that, right? You're not. So they're all different tissues for different identifications: urine, stool, blood, hair. Sometimes. So
even should I mix bottled water from like a spring, like bottles of spring water with the filtered water? Will the spring water still have the minerals?
It depends on the spring. So I mean, I hate that the answer is so much. It depends. It's all individual.
Right.
But I actually am not familiar with the zero water product. So do they advertise that they take out every mineral or take out every substance?
They said they take out like the toxins, the chlorine, the fluoride. Didn't say so much about the minerals, so maybe I am still getting them. Maybe.
So it might not be problematic. Most companies that are that have a product that remove minerals are offering a somewhat advanced product because it takes a lot to do that. So most of them don't, unless they are specifically saying reverse osmosis, I believe.
Okay.
Probably getting some from
Thank
there.
you. And then
Sure.
the other quick question was, how do I sign up for the 6-week class? Through Michelle?
Question.
That's Sharon. That's going to be a mill class. So that would be April 5th is the 10 o'clock is the start of the mill registration. You'll be able to read more about it as we populate the sign, the portal, the Schedules Plus system. We're starting to put in all the mill classes. When I say we, it's me and a volunteer. So you'll be able to see the classes, the process. We are going to have, like Sarah said, there'll be a waiver and some paperwork you have to fill out. And then it's really asking that it's not a drop-in class. It's a 6-week commitment. Because I know a lot of these classes, people, they can make, they can't make, but really only sign up for that. The first 10 people that, will sign up. But we really want to make sure, and we will generate a wait list because some people might wind up dropping it when they realize what the commitment is. Some people sign up for everything just in order, but that'll be, sign up will start on April 5th at 10 o'clock. There's another question about, you said roasted nuts, not roasted nuts, raw nuts. What's the difference if they're not salted?
So nuts contain fat, which is super beneficial, but some fats are damaged at high heat. So for instance, olive oil. Olive oil is one of the most nutritious fats we can get our hands on, and it's great for gentle sauteing. But if you're roasting vegetables at 400 or 425 degrees, I would use something like coconut oil, something solid at room temperature, which has more saturated fat and can tolerate higher heat. So that's the issue, is that the fat can get rancid if they're roasted at high temperature. If you're roasting them yourself, that could be great if you're doing it at a gentle temperature.
Well, that's interesting. Any other questions out there? If just unmute yourself and ask.
So I had a question about the Brita filter, since you were talking about water. Is that a good filter for water?
So Brita can be very beneficial. Yes. Yes.
And my other question, which I came in a little late, I apologize. Wine and cheese. Tell me they're okay.
Wrong clock.
But not the wine and cheese.
So here's what I'll say. There is the cruel joke in the nutritional therapy world, which is, what is the food that you could never give up? It's probably the one you need to give up, right? So when I quit my Wall Street job to become a pastry chef, I can look back at that and say, that was like the alcoholic who wants to work in the liquor store. And I'm not saying you're an alcoholic, but there is this addiction. And I think you mentioned this, Michelle, that another speaker talked about the idea that sugar, alcohol, they light up the part of our brain just like cocaine. Our brain doesn't experience any difference. And when we talk about that intuitive eating, we think, oh, I feel drawn to alcohol right now. I feel drawn to some crackers or cheese. There's actually an opioid-like component in cheese, and the American Dairy Council has worked very hard over the last couple of decades to concentrate that and refine it and create addiction to dairy. So it's more about finding balance, right? Bringing mindfulness. Am I eating this because I'm a little hungry, or am I eating this because, oh my gosh, I need it right now?
Right. And so we've been cooking from the Blue Zone cookbook on Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's the 5 zones where people live the longest. And, the Sardinian people, we found drink 1 glass of, not multiple glasses, but a glass of this red wine that's very high in antioxidants. So again, it's like the moderation idea. Yes. And it's the need. It's not, they're not drinking it as well. I mean, food is medicine, but it's that addiction side of it. It's that, yes, I need to relax versus I need this to stay healthy. And they drink their wine because it's a part of their diet. It's that they have that glass with their dinner or their lunch with their beans, mostly.
Yes.
Mostly and all of these, everything that we're finding out is it's a very plant-based diet. It's what grows. And also that the question came up about fish on my feed. What about any thoughts on fish? Because
So
always talking about how
I absolutely think fish is part of a great diet. Again, it's about how it's sourced, right? Just like I don't think red meat is bad, but maybe the red meat at McDonald's has some metal shavings in it, or, you know, not the greatest source, right? So for fish, is it fresh and wild caught, or is it farmed? Because they've started finding a very economic incentive. It's economically beneficial to feed fish grains.
Mhm.
What fish has access to grains? That's not right. So
They don't swim, out of the ocean
I-
up to the farmland. Right.
yeah.
One
So I
question,
would say, sure.
Go ahead.
back to oils. I buy olive oil, but I also buy canola oil. Is that good or bad?
So canola oil, there is no such thing as a canola plant. Canola oil means Canada oil. So it was developed in Canada by some scientists. People like it because it does have a very high heat tolerance, but our bodies don't recognize it as food. So I tell people, if you could create that oil in your house, if you wanted to take the time, you could buy an olive press and you could press those olives and make your oil. It would take forever, but you could do it. Other oils, corn oil, cottonseed oil, canola oil, the only way you could create them is under extreme pressure, extreme heat, and then they add deodorizers because the result is something kind of awful. So I would focus on olive, coconut, avocado if you're not heating too high, duck fat, bacon fat.
Wow. Surprising.
Oh, okay, so just for regular cooking, if you don't want to use your olive oil because it's so expensive, the next best would be
Next
coconut
best,
oil.
coconut is great. Yep. And coconut can taste so buttery. A good quality butter, good quality ghee. Those would all be great.
Thank you. Thank you.
And again, I would say the bacon fat or the chicken fat, or oh, here's a question about cholesterol. Okay, awesome. So the issue with cholesterol is there was a diet cholesterol hypothesis promoted in the 50s. And there was a researcher who wanted to be able to correlate dietary intake of fats, saturated fats, with heart disease. And he studied 22 countries and created a graph of the results. 6 of the countries' results supported his hypothesis. The other 16 did not show any correlation between saturated fat intake and cholesterol. He threw out the data from the 16 countries, grabbed the data for 6 countries, and promoted the hell out of it, and it stuck for decades. And we have been sold this bill of goods that saturated fats are bad. Saturated fats are problematic in the face of a lot of carbohydrate, like the piece of cake, right? Refined flour and fat. Bad combo. And sugar. That's a bad combo. When we eat more of a paleo style of eating with a good healthy dose of vegetable, people think paleo is like, oh, they just eat meat. It's meat plus lots of fresh veg. And we move away from grains, almost like a Mediterranean grainless diet. It's fine. The only 2 foods I say are really problematic in any form are processed oils, and this one may be controversial, but soy, unless it is fermented and in small quantities. So other than that, it's all about how that food was sourced. There's a farm in Virginia called Polyface Farms, and the owner says, our animals live the most amazing, comfortable, beautiful outdoor life where they express the full pigness of the pig and the cowness of the cow for every single day of their lives, except one. So, you know, that's, and it works in a symbiotic relationship where the earth is created to be sustainable too in that relationship, right? It's getting the nutrients from what the animals are putting off. So that's my take on it. I know veganism is becoming such a big thing right now, and there can be some benefits to it in terms of cleansing, right? It's a gentle diet, but I would look at it more as for a season than for a lifetime, because it's extremely hard, in my opinion, to get all the nutrients you need. And I don't mean just B12, which is the classic, oh, what do you do about vegan diets? It's very, very hard and takes so much work to truly have a nutrient-dense vegan diet. My take.
Interesting. All right. I thank you so much, Sarah. I just want to say that one of the best meetings I ever had on the playground was finding you. That's how I met Sarah. Montclair is filled with fascinating, wonderful, super intelligent people, and I'm so grateful that I found you again. We met once. Our kids were playing on the swings and playground, and we kind of lost touch here in Montclair, and so glad to have you back in my life, the lives of our wonderful community. So thank you so much for coming today, and
you're so welcome.
More of you. This was really, really terrific. I feel so good.
Good.
And I hope everybody feels that way as well.
Wonderful. Guys, glad to be here. Thank you so much. So just briefly, I offer one-on-one therapy. I teach group classes, which we're going to do with Mill. I do some functional blood chemistry analysis to see what that aspect brings to nutrition. And I also do some genetic testing as it relates to nutrition. So those are the services. So I'm looking forward to teaching in April.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.